What is going on, everybody? I go by the name of Curry, and I want to thank you guys for joining me here today on SneakerPhetish. I'm logoed up in my hometown St. Louis Cardinals gear because we're here to talk today about Air Force Ones, and I had to do it while also repping my hometown because there's a lot of debate going on around this sneaker right now, and I'm here to end it all with a little bit of history and a little bit of cultural impact. So, without further ado, let's get into it. This is the Air Force One Low in the newest triple red colorway. Hopefully you guys have been able to get your hands on a pair of these, but I want to use this sneaker to really discuss the history of the Air Force One and to put an end to this debate about who made it popular. If you guys have been around Twitter or Instagram lately, you've been seeing there's been a lot of news getting kicked up lately about who really was it that made the Air Force One popular. Was it Nelly with his song? Was it Jay-Z? Was it A$AP Rocky? All of this came from a quote from A$AP Rocky where he talked about the fact that he was really the one that made Air Force Ones popular. Let's just get this out of the way right now. A$AP Rocky is out of his ASAP mind. There's no way that A$AP Rocky was the one that is keeping or making Air Force Ones popular. But like I said, that's why I think it's time to give A$AP as well as everybody else a little history lesson about this shoe. Let's take it all the way back to 1982. I was -4 years old. I wasn't born until 86, but Nike was alive and well, and Bruce Kilgore came into Nike to design what would end up becoming the Air Force One. Now, first things first, the Air Force One was always called the Air Force One. It was not called the Air Force like some people think, but at the time, Nike had just introduced this new air technology, and the Air Force One was the first basketball sneaker to introduce the air technology. Now, Air Force One, of course, was made to mimic the presidential airplane. So in any event, the Air Force One comes out in 1982, and it flops. People aren't really feeling the sneaker. People aren't really feeling the design, maybe the look of it. It's just not something people like. A lot of people didn't like the fact that it was a little heavy on the bottom. A lot of people just really weren't feeling it, and it flopped. Now, before Nike ended up discontinuing the sneaker in 1984, they came out with a campaign with the original 6 in 1983 when they really started pushing the Air Force One model out to basketball players. Michael Cooper, Bobby Jones, Moses Malone, Calvin Nat, Michael Thompson, and Jamal Wilkes. Those were the original 6 that Nike picked for their campaign to introduce the Air Force One. But even with all that hoopla and all those marketing dollars that were being thrown at the Air Force One campaign that was supposed to be Nike's flagship, the sneaker still failed. Now, at the time, Nike had to make a little bit of cap space for a young up-and-comer whose name was Michael Jordan. And in 1984, 1985, a lot of that money got channeled over to Michael Jordan to create the Air Jordan, which obviously took off in a major way. So with all that money that was being generated from Air Jordan, Nike just started to hear a little bit of noise from people that were really starting to kick up and say that they wanted the Air Force One back. Now, even though Nike chose to discontinue the sneaker because on a large scale, they really weren't getting the sales that they were hoping to get from it, there were 3 retailers that have been accredited in the Baltimore, Maryland area with actually saving the Air Force One. Charlie Rudo Sports, Cinderella Shoes, and Downtown Locker Room are the 3 retailers in Baltimore that were blowing through all of their Air Force One inventory. People were buying up the sneakers. They loved the colorways. They loved the customization of it. They loved the way the sneakers look. Now, Baltimore and all along the East Coast, we all know that they have been fashion forward. I used to live in New York myself, and I always used to tell people New York is about 5 to 10 years ahead in fashion than the rest of the world is. But it was still regional. It was still small. And even though they were selling about 3,000 pairs in the store, that really wasn't enough to really whet Nike's palate, but it was enough for them to reconsider bringing the shoe back. Now, as a result of that, a lot of people in Baltimore feel like Baltimore was actually the city that revived and put the Air Force Ones on the map. I beg to differ because you got to look at this from a really large perspective, from a macro scale, but let's get into it a little more. What the Air Force One revolution in Baltimore ended up revealing was that people really were getting into customizing their sneakers, and they didn't want a plain looking colorway of a shoe. Now, that would change later on, but we'll get to that in a minute. As a result, Nike started making these really weird one-off colorways. Special retailers would get special colorways of the shoe, and it really started taking off. It was a little bit more limited edition, and again, Baltimore was booming. So the movement for Air Force One started moving all the way up the East Coast into New York. Now we're getting into the 90s, and there's a little rap group that's up and coming that's centered out of Harlem and Brooklyn, and they're called Rockefeller Records. Now, Rockefeller was headed up by Kareem Biggs Burke, Dame Dash, and of course, Jay-Z, Sean Carter. And these guys were known for buying out all white Air Force Ones by the truckloads in a store called Tom, Dick, and Harry's that was located in Harlem. That's why the sneaker was dubbed the Uptown. And to this day, you go up to New York and people are still talking talking about copping a pair of ups or a pair of uptowns. People don't call them Air Force Ones. They don't call them Forces. Those are names that people use in other parts of the country. But if you go to New York, you're calling them uptowns. Dame Dash and Biggs have been quoted by saying that they used to buy up to 150 pairs of Air Force Ones at a single time. Remember, Dame Dash and those guys at Rockefeller always had a big thing about being fresh. They never wore the same thing twice. So they would wear a pair of Air Force Ones. Once they wore them, they'd throw them out, turn on a new pair. So because of the way that they did that and for that need to be fresh all the time, Nike definitely started paying attention to the fact that Harlem was blowing through a ton of inventory of Air Force Ones as well. Now, you guys also got to remember Rockefeller was on the top of the top, especially in the late 90s. So the people liked the way that they dressed. They were fresh all the time. People wanted to be like them. They wanted to be like Jay-Z. So because of that, a lot of other people started wearing uptowns as well, and they really started getting into that fashion too. However, it was still regional. It really hadn't hit the masses yet. It hadn't hit the West Coast. It didn't hit North Dakota and Wisconsin and St. Louis and all these other different places. It wasn't on a huge scale yet. Nike was making good money. The Air Force One showed a lot of promise thanks to Baltimore and New York. But then in 2002, a little rapper that goes by the name of Nelly came out with a song called Air Force Ones. Now, this kind of bothers me a little bit because for the 35th anniversary of the original Air Force One in 2017, Nike did a little spread on their website where they talked about the influence of the Air Force One and the different places that it hit. And they talked about hip hop's influence, but they bigged up Kareem Burke from Rockefeller because Rockefeller came out with that special edition all white Air Force One with the old school Rockefeller logo on it. I'm not mad at the promo, but at the end of the day, I feel like Nelly's influence and how huge that record became, the fact that he wasn't even mentioned anywhere in that spread, to me was a little bit of a slap in the face. So I'm here to defend my guy. I was living in St. Louis when Nelly was really starting to blow up. But let me tell you guys something. People were already rocking these by the truckloads in St. Louis. We just really didn't say much about it. The all whites were the ones that we were rocking out there. You could rock the lows, you could rock the mids or the highs, but we were rocking them pretty heavy in St. Louis anyway. So heavy that Nelly came out with a song about them because he loved them that much. Nelly had the hip hop world taken by storm in the early 2000s, and everything that he was coming out with, everything that man touched turned to gold. So when he came out with Air Force Ones and that song blew up along with the video, the rest was history. Let me run down a couple of stats just so that you guys can put some respect on Cornell Haynes' name. Air Force Ones was number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 4 on the hip hop and R&B charts for Billboard, and number 1 on the hot rap tracks for Billboard. Air Force Ones was also Nelly's 3rd top 5 hit from his Nellyville album. Everybody had Nellyville. I don't care who you are, you had Nellyville. By the time Nellyville came out, Nelly was on fire. He came out with songs like EI, Air Force Ones, and a lot of other hits like Dilemma with Kelly Rowland. You guys love that song. I don't want to hear that you didn't. Nelly put the Air Force One on the global stage. Everybody at that point had to have a pair of Air Force Ones, not just because of the impact, but because everybody wanted to be like Nelly as well. We were in the hip hop phase. People wore the big oversized clothes, and when they came out with the Air Force Ones, the beauty in the lyrics of the song was that they talked about all the different crazy color combinations that him and the Saint Lunatics loved as well. You want to know how I know that it took the world by storm? Because after Air Force Ones came out, the price went up on the Air Force One sneaker. Again, I'm not here to debate that. That is a solid gold fact. Now, the Air Force Ones normally were about between $60 and $70. They were a cheap sneaker, and I think that's why Rockefeller was buying them by the truckload like that, because buying them at $150 at a time, they were probably getting wholesale pricing on the shoe. So they were probably walking out only spending $30 to $40 per pair of Air Force Ones to look pretty fresh. When Nelly came out with the song, the price of the sneaker shot up to $100. Guess what? Everybody still bought them up. Now, the rest has been history. Everybody loves a good pair of Air Force Ones. They're a super affordable sneaker, super clean looking sneaker. And honestly, I think it's one of the more timeless sneakers. I think the Air Force One is just as timeless as the Air Jordan 1. Nike really struck gold with this one, and I'm super glad that they listened to the people in Baltimore and on the East Coast to make sure that they went ahead and brought this back. But make no mistake about it, the question is, who made the Air Force One popular? And if we're talking numbers and if we're talking global scale influence, it goes to Nelly. There's no debate about it. The main reason why I say that again is because the price of the sneaker didn't go up until Nelly came up with the song. Nike did not think that they could raise the price of the shoe, and it was popular enough at that time when Baltimore was doing it and when New York was doing it. But when Nelly came out with it and they saw those sales really go up, Nike realized that they could raise the price of the shoe because the demand was so high that people were willing to pay more money to get their hands on the sneaker. That's real influence. But you know what? That's just one man's opinion. Again, as a St. Louis native, I take my music from my hometown very seriously, and the people and the contributions that they made to the hip hop world and to the fashion world, I also take it very seriously. To be fair, Nelly came out with a lot of other stuff that failed. He came out with his own clothing line called Vocal. That failed. He came out with the jean line Apple Bottom. That failed, but not as bad. So his influence with Air Force Ones and, lest we forget, Stepped on My J's. Now again, Stepped on My J's, I'm not saying that he made Jordan sales go up. Jordans were already popular, but at the same time, everybody made sure that they ran out and grabbed a pair of Jordans because once again, Nelly was on top. He came out with Sierra on the song and Jermaine Dupri, and that was a huge hit as well. Everybody had to get a pair of Jordans at that point, even if they didn't have them. Y'all gonna put some respect on Nelly's name today. All right, guys, listen, that's all that I got. Now I want you guys to go ahead and tell me that I'm wrong down in the comments. Tell me, who do you think made the Air Force Ones popular? Do you think it was A$AP Rocky? Do you think that it was Jay-Z? Do you think that it was the Baltimore movement? Or do you think that it was Nelly? Sound out down below. Let me know. Oh, of course, right down in the comments, make sure that you click on that subscribe button so we can welcome you into the Sneaker Fetish family to make sure you don't miss out on any more heat that comes through like these, because I guarantee you, I got a lot more heat on the way. As always, I want to thank you guys for joining me here today on Sneaker Fetish, taking a look at these with me for a few minutes, dialoguing with me a little bit. I go by the name of Kari. This is the Nike Air Force One Low in triple red. And until next time, I'm out.